In a twist as unexpected as finding a working vending machine in the post apocalyptic wasteland, Fallout co creator Tim Cain recently dropped a bomb more potent than any nuke in the game's lore. Contrary to popular belief, the franchise wasn't meant to be a scathing critique of capitalism, but rather a commentary on the inevitability of war due to human nature. This revelation has left many fans more shaken than a vault dweller emerging into the sunlight for the very first time. Speaking of shaking up belief systems, let's take a moment to honor the late, great Phil Donahue, a man who wasn't afraid to tackle tough topics on his groundbreaking talk show. Little did Donahue know that he was about to face his own personal apocalypse when he invited economist Milton Friedman onto his program in 1979. In what can only be described as the greatest economic smackdown in television history, Freeman proceeded to dismantle Donahue's anti capitalistic stance with the precision of a VATS assisted headshot. Armed with logic sharper than a death claws, Friedman systematically explained why capitalism, despite its flaws, remains the most effective economic system we have. Friedman's arguments hit Donahue harder than a super mutant sledgehammer, leaving the host's socialist leanings in ruins. With the calm demeanor of the lone wanderer, Friedman explained the power of voluntary exchange, the importance of economic freedom, the unintended consequences of government intervention. By the end of the interview, Donahue looked as shell shocked as a Vault Tech experiment gone wrong. Freeman had effectively demonstrated that, much like the resilient survivors in Fallout, capitalism adapts and thrives, even in the harshest conditions. So, whether you're navigating the treacherous terrain of post apocalyptic America or the equally perilous landscape of economic theory, remember, war may never change, but our understanding of economic complex systems just might. Hello, everybody. This is William Del Pilar, and this is the Red, White, and Rude, where politics and pop culture intersect, and the conservative Latino is here to explain it all. Before I go on, hit like and share. And do not forget, you can find this podcast, The Red, White, and Rude, along with my other conservative political podcast, Fired Up, and my sports political podcast, Points on the Board, along with our libertarian and our pure play sports only podcast at grumblingsmedia.com, as well as your social media platforms such as Rumble, YouTube, Apple, Pandora, and Spotify under the profile handle Grumblings Media. So let's get to it. We're going to talk about three topics today, and they're all going to focus on capitalism. Well, two of the three will. We're going to talk about Fallout and co-creator Tim Cain's comments on capitalism. It's a great series that most people now know about, but it's an even better game. And then we're going to honor the late, great Phil Donahue, as well as talk about arguably the legacy he will now be known for because it's his most seen segment or in show on the internet, and that is when he brought Milton Friedman, the Nobel laureate economist, onto his show. So, first of all, let's talk about Fallout and the co-creator Tim Cain. Where's that at? Here we go. Here we go. Here we go. All righty. So, for those of you who aren't aware of who Tim Cain is, let me go ahead and bring up that picture I have of him. He has his own podcast on YouTube as well. But for those of you interested, this is who Tim Cain is. And as stated, he is the co-creator of Fallout, one of the greatest RPGs out there and one of the most popular games. If I remember correctly, I think after Fallout 3 or Vegas, New Vegas, or Fallout 4, one of those three, I think it made like $750 million its first day of release. So it's a juggernaut of a game, and he's the co-creator. So what I call this segment is Fallout, where players nuke capitalism, miss the mushroom cloud of human nature. So, first of all, Fallout is known, or rather, the perception by younger players is that it has anti-capitalistic themes in it, and I can see where they get that. So the pre-world of Fallout, or in Fallout, is often depicted as a hyper-capitalistic society that ultimately led to its own destruction. I didn't see it that way, but as I played it and as I learned more and more about the game, as I was playing it, I could see that. I just look at life realistically. It's easy to be a grunt, and when I say grunt, meaning you're not in that top 1%, and blame corporations and the rich for everything bad when it's not really the case, and I will explain why. But regardless, in the game, many younger players, and I say younger because it tends to be the young and dumb, and those who have yet to live life. I call life. I look at life as an adventure. It's like life is a journey. Make it an adventure. I don't remember who said that. I didn't make it up, but it's an apt saying that I think if we all lived by, we would lead not only more productive lives, but have a lot more fun and a lot more great memories. I'm 57, and the memories I have from traveling the world, being in the military, helping others out as a volunteer, working in a nonprofit world, and then being an entrepreneur and helping to pioneer and commercialize a brand new industry, I'm pretty satisfied. Of course, I'm greedy, which will be a topic in this hour. I want more. But back to Fallout. The pre-world in Fallout, as I said, is seen as hyper-capitalistic society that ultimately led to its destruction. And that's we see that through the advertising, through corporate influence, as well as rampant consumerism throughout the game world. One of the major components of Fallout is a corporation called Vault-Tec in their universe, and they're usually Vault-Tec was a company that built these vaults in preparation for nuclear fallout, and they weren't the noble people they tried to make themselves out to be, because they're very unethical. They conducted secret experiments set up in the vaults for once apocalypse hits, and they lived off the profits of that and government contracts before the apocalypse happened. So the game often showcases the wealth disparity, even within the apocalypse, with lavish pre-war locations contrasting with the poverty-stricken wasteland. And some players do draw parallels with the in-game corporations like Nuka-Cola. You think of Pepsi or Coca-Cola, or Robco. You can think of Apple, Microsoft, Google, those big mega corporations, and who seek monopolistic practices and corporate overreach. So, Tim Cain is the co-creator of Fallout. As I said, that is Tim Cain. He has his own podcast. I will actually put it down in the notes for you. And to show you guys the pictures of Fallout, I think Fallout's pretty cool in the game lore. There's one right there. You see the big Fallout logo there with various characters. You get Vault Boy. That's a ranger in the middle there in New Vegas. That's Nuka Cola. And there's your oh gosh, I'm drawing a blank here, but one of the main characters. Uh, oh my God, I am drawing the Steel Brotherhood. That's what I was trying to think of. That's the character there, the Steel Brotherhood. So it's actually a very fun game, very popular. Here's another one I have here of it. There you go, the Ranger there. It's great. That image, these images, that the Frazetta type cover right there. But the Brotherhood of Steel character there, and that's a Ranger. The NCR, which they're not happy with on the television show. But that, in a nutshell, is Fallout. Incredible game, incredible game. But Tim Cain, the original creator, he had a podcast on capitalism, and also stated in another podcast that anti-capitalism wasn't the point of Fallout. And the fact that he says this obviously carries significant weight from the simple fact he's the creator. I mean, As players, we can sit there and draw our own conclusions, but at the end of the day, his is the only one that counts in terms of what the truth is for the game, since he created it. In essence, he is God to that game. He emphasized that the series was more focused on exploring human nature and the inevitability of conflict rather than critiquing specific economic systems. When I started working with my partner, Big John, on Grumblings Media, I kept starting to stress to him because he and I looked at life differently. I think he was more aligned. He's not an anti-capitalistic person, but his mindset was more aligned in how these young men and women look at life. Whereas I have traveled the world, 30 some odd countries. I've lived in various countries. I've worked with hundreds, if not thousands, of different individuals from all races, cultures. And what I've discovered is our guiding principle is based off our human nature. We are all the same in many ways. Now, how we allow human nature to dictate to us is what makes us different. But at the end of the day, in his eyes, war is inevitable with our human nature, not based off our capitalistic system. And I agree, because human nature is the same here in the States and Russia and China and Canada, whatever country you're in. And to me, it's power and greed, and it's all corrupt. We are humans. We are imperfect. We will eventually be corrupted. So, his statement that it wasn't based on anti-capitalism rings true to me. And this suggests that any anti-capitalist readings into it is just incidental or player interpreted, what you want to get out of it based off your belief system, rather than intentionally central to the game's design. Capitalism, anti-capitalism was never the point in Fallout. And according to Cain, a Fallout is a commentary on anything. It's about how war is inevitable given basic human nature. That's his quote. It's about how war is inevitable given basic human nature. My take, it's simple. Corporations are made up of people, and these individuals are the first to download songs illegally and movies too. So what do I mean by that? Corporations are made up of people. The same kids that will sit there and download a song illegally or watch a movie that's been pirated are the same kids who will eventually grow up and be running corporations. Now, granted, that's not going to be you, my kid, or your kid, the working class kid. It's going to be kids from silver spoon families who are legacy kids who are allowed into Stanford, into Harvard, Yale, Princeton. Now, y'all will come back and say, William, they're making laws against that. Those who want to get down into the nitty gritty, they may make laws, but it's still going to happen. But and to give you an example, I helped pioneer the fantasy sports industry. I saw it in there. People wanted to have our services for free. I need to try out your service. Then be another week, another week. Eventually, we nixed all that, or they would sign up. And it's a service where we pull all the data and we would make predictions. Now, because of humanity and the fact we're not perfect, sometimes we could have all the data aligned properly and the player would still not perform since it was fantasy sports. They get so mad. I need my money back. You were wrong. Look, we never guaranteed you were going to be right. I'm going to report you to the state's attorney general. After a while, I would tell my guys, when they call and say that, just say, hey, do you want us to provide you the number? Most of the time we got to hang up. But there were some rude people, their own greed, their own way of looking at life. They would project their ills, their hatred, their anger, their beliefs onto others. I had a story I was going to tell with one of our fantasy leagues, and a player, he was just an a-hole. I guess he was having issues with his child and had cancer. But every time he would call with an issue or problem, he'd always fall back to that. And then once he called and would complain about something, and I just threw it back in his face. Well, aren't you the one with the child with cancer? And I can't remember the exact gist of it, but it was just silence. And I said, we will refund you your money, but we are done with you. Click, and I hung up on him. I slowly began to realize, the customer isn't always right in this new internet world, because when you're not face to face, people say and do ugly things. And this was what you call a keeper league. So he owned this league year to year. And he apologized immediately. I was like, enough for him, because what will happen, he'll apologize, we accept it, and then he'll go back to his old ways. But my take is that it's easy to sit there and say anti-capitalistic this, anti-capitalistic that, corporations this, screed that. Look in the mirror. Whenever I would have this discussion with a kid my age at the time when I started the company, actually a few years younger, I'd always sit there and say, "Let me check out your computer, see how many illegal downloads you have. Oh, it's none of your business. I bet you have Napster. Napster was a big software that would rip songs and allow you to download it. You know." But Cain mentions that the game went out of its way to mention that other countries like China were also behaving terribly, and that's a communist country. Again, implying that fallout is not limited to capitalistic society, but extends to various political and economic systems. So, I mean, some of the broader themes, it's that Cain saw Fallout as addressing more than universal themes about human behavior, power, and conflict, rather than focusing on critiquing specific economic or political systems. He wanted to look at the bigger picture, and that bigger picture is looking inside ourselves at our own human nature. He seems to view the game's themes as more broadly focused on human nature and, again, the inevitability of conflict rather than capitalism. Now, I have played Fallout. I've tried Fallout actually, but I played from beginning to end Fallout 3 and Fallout New Vegas, and I own all the other ones. I own every Fallout game. I just haven't had a chance to play them all yet because they are long, time-consuming games. And as an adult with a job, it's kind of tough. So this game does portray, in a negative fashion, communist societies through the lens of pre-war China in the Fallout University or universe rather. So it's very diverse in the systems it critiques. Again, it's more about extremism, greed, power, corruption, and when you play the game, it's not just the corporate entities and people representing those factions in the game. It's also the everyday person. You know, you get a lot of choices in the decisions you can make, from nuking a city or town to doing what's right. Again, my take is look in the mirror, look at your own kids. You know, check their computers out. How much illegality do they have there? Whether it's music download, a pirated movie or game, a crack. They call them crack games when I was younger. But we do things, or how many times do they just flat out lie to cover their tracks? I mean, so my point being is nobody's a saint. We always want to portray the corporations and capitalism as the only evil, when the evil is actually us, because we're the ones who work in government. Government's another big entity. I talked about capitalism and corporatism here, but it's even worse in government. Yet people who want to criticize those things will look at government as the all angelic entity, and they're far from it. I mean, look at all the lies Kamala, Obama, Biden, Bush 1 and Bush 2. All those lies those politicians have said, and each side takes them as gospel, but it's the other side that's wrong. They're all wrong. You know, I have always voted conservative. That's who I am and what my makeup is, but I'm not an idiot. I'm not a sycophant. I'm not a cult member. I'm not tribalistic. I will criticize when there's criticism to be made, but I will also praise. The problem is there was nothing to praise for 8 years of Obama. The economy was in the tank, empty promises. With Trump, we had the greatest economy in 4 years in our history. The working wage was up because he removed regulations and allowed the free market, capitalism, to take place, and kind of did as much as possible to stay out of it. My downside with Trump was our deficit went up by trillions, you know. So my final take on this is I agree with Tim Cain. You know, being anti-capitalistic is moronic because people in this country who are anti-capitalistic, they've never actually truly lived in a socialist country, in a communist country, in a dictatorship. That's what I loathe about these people. The grass is greener on the other side in their minds. And they have no clue. Why? Because of capitalism that has given them the life they have. They're too ignorant to understand. You take that away, and we will be living miserable existences. That's why people come to America from dictatorships, from socialist countries, from communist countries, and they praise capitalism and our economic way of life. All right, let's move on. Let us talk about Phil Donahue. Let me find my notes on good old Phil here. So, Phil Donahue, despite being progressive swine in a political pen, he pioneered daytime TV as a fair marketplace of ideas. That is Phil. Ooh, you can barely see Phil there, huh? Well, that is good old Phil. Everybody talks about Oprah when they talk about talk shows, but Oprah couldn't hold Phil's jockstrap. Oprah owes her career to Phil Donahue. Phil Donahue trailblazed all of this. And it was at a time when we only had 3 networks. So in the annals of history, you will find more people knew of and watch and listen to Phil Donahue than anybody ever did Oprah. That's not to take away from Oprah. It's to show how big Phil Donahue was. He was born in December 21st, 1935. And that's why a lot of people today don't know him. He was pre-internet era. See, Oprah will go down probably. Actually, nobody. You don't see people referencing Oprah's clips. They actually reference Phil's clips a lot. Again, born December 21st, 1935. He started out as production assistant at KYW, which is Radio and Television Cleveland, then a stringer for CBS Evening News, then an anchor for a local station, WHIO, in Daytona, Ohio. And from there, he went on to launch The Phil Donahue Show, December 6th, 1967. 37 years old. So he was a young man when he did that. And that was in Dayton, Ohio. He pioneered the audience participation where the audience would ask questions. He was the first to do that. The show ran for 29 years with nearly 7,000 episodes. Oprah, in contrast, ran for 25 years and only had about 4,500 episodes. Again, not to downplay Oprah, but to show how big Phil Donahue was. His final episode aired on September 13th, 1996. That's about the time the commercialization of the internet was just beginning to happen, where we still had where the fast internet was a 56K modem. Now, I don't even know if 56K modems were out in 96. Actually, they were. They were out in 96. By 1996, they were out. But my point is his world ended as the internet era was coming into being, which completely changed how we see and how we're going to remember people. So Phil Donahue will not be remembered as much, but when you look at history, his impact will be much more greater than any other talk show host. And I'm not even a Phil Donahue fan because he was a leftist, but you have to honor what he did. He interviewed high profile figures like Jimmy Hoffa and Malcolm X. These are historical figures. He gave platforms to marginalized voices and perspectives. Again, he trailblazes for everybody else. He won 20 Daytime Emmy Awards, including 8 for Outstanding Talk Show Host. He received the Peabody Award in 1980. He was inducted into the Academy of Television Arts and Sciences Hall of Fame in 1993. Awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom by Joe Biden in 2024. I got this shirt. This tag is really bugging me. Sorry, people. Again, revolutionized the daytime talk show format. He influenced future talk show hosts, including Oprah Winfrey, and he promoted open discussions on social and political issues. For those of us old enough to remember that show, That Girl, he was married to actress Marlo Thomas since 1980, and she was with him till he died, till he passed. And he died in August 18th, just a few weeks ago, at the age of 88, August 18th. He died peacefully at home, surrounded by family. He was battling a long-term illness, and we don't know what that is, but it doesn't really matter. So that's Phil Donahue, the icon. Phil Donahue was also a liberal swine. He was known for his liberal political views. He described himself as a proud liberal, and he underwent a transformation from being a conservative Catholic with a conservative Catholic upbringing to becoming an outspoken feminist, and free-thinking agnostic. He was a beta male. Yeah, I mean, the Butler wrote a book, and oh my God, Marlo Thomas ran that marriage like Hitler treated Jews. It wasn't pretty. He was a beta male, which I thought was so sad considering how iconic he was to learn these things. And I want to say it wasn't fair, but that's life. He crapped on a lot of people too. So maybe we'll call that karma when that came out publicly, but it's part of who he was. And I thought he deserved being given the beta male title. I mean, he talked about Trump's administration as the darkest political moment in American history. Trump gave us the greatest economy in history. He did more for minorities than any liberal icon, including Sir Obama, thus showing Donahue as being out of touch with the society he claimed to love, which is typical of the rich. He did not care for capitalism, or rather, I'm sorry, let me take that back. He critiqued capitalism. He wasn't explicitly anti-capitalistic. His shows featured discussions that were critical of aspects of capitalism and corporate power. Now, I'm trying to be moderate here. In my heart, I believe that he didn't care for capitalism. He always had people like Ralph Nader on there criticizing corporate America. Yeah, he made over 20 million a year. It was back in the 80s. 20 million. That's probably about 30 plus million in today's dollar from the same corporations he said he loathed. He would have curtailed their power, not giving them as much economic power as they currently have. I see the pros and cons in that. The problem is he's saying that as he's banking what would be over 30 million today. He would take that away from others who would rise up to enjoy the fruits of their labor as he did. So, despite my belief of him being that way, why am I honoring him? Well, he did have a balanced platform. Despite his liberal views, Donahue regularly invited conservative guests. He gave them ample opportunity to express their opinions. Figures like Milton Friedman, who I'm going to talk about here shortly in a few, William F. Buckley Jr., seen by many as a father of conservatism, and Pat Buchanan, who people have really, the leftist media have really tried to destroy, but he was just more about the economic power of what made America great and what he felt should keep America great. And that was everything we were economically, with capitalism, entrepreneurism, and the foundation of who and what America is. And my point to extend that is we need to assimilate into America. We don't. We tell, I'm Latino. Yo hablo, escribo y leo español. I speak, read, and write Spanish. I'm proud of my Latino heritage, my Panamanian, Puerto Rican heritage, but I am an American first. My family assimilated. We have people who don't assimilate. They come here and they live off the fruits of this country, and they hate America, death to America. They want to change America into socialism. Well, if you take away what makes America great and made us the number one economic power, that made us a superpower, that made us the big brother of the world, and whether you like it or not, that's what we are, then you will just enhance and speed up the destruction of this nuclear age world. Because when bad actors are allowed to do what they want and terrorism is allowed to run amok in this nuclear age, it's only a matter of time before a bad person gets a dirty bomb. When you don't have a system in place with our FBI, our CIA, when they do their jobs and aren't part of the deep state, then we are a better country. The problem is we've allowed ourselves to take our eye off the ball and allowed those institutions to become corrupt. And now it's like the tail wagging the dog. So we've got to do something to bring them back in, because right now our country is on a death spiral and it's moving at an exponential pace yearly. So back to Donahue. We're going to talk about Friedman, Milton Friedman. He hosted Friedman, Buckley Jr., and Pat Buchanan and others like them. As I said, Ralph Nader, various leftists. But Friedman's takedown of Donahue's belief will be the legacy of his show. But that said, it was Donahue who allowed Friedman the platform to take down communism and socialism. Of course, I don't think Phil saw it that way before the show began. And again, audience participation. I love the fact that how he was an entrepreneur for that, how he opened that. Talk radio, that's what makes up talk radio, but he brought it to television. This led to spontaneous debates between guests and audience members, further diversifying the viewpoints presented. He was an entrepreneur wanting the public involved. It was like talk radio, but the studio version. It was brilliant. And he advocates what I advocate, corporate responsibility. Many of Donahue's shows touch on the idea that businesses have a responsibility to society beyond profit making. I, as a child, remember the Indian in the 70s commercials as we saw the pollution of the rivers in America. You saw the Indian with the tear. Now, that turns out to be a big lie. Indians were just as greedy, just as corrupt, just as vile, vicious, and savage towards one another as they claim the white man is everybody. I mean, you look to Africa, look at the genocide that happens in Africa, in Europe, with the white man, the black man, and the Latin countries. It's human greed, it's human corruption. It was no different in this country with corporations being run by greedy humans, greedy Americans, allowing the pollution. They didn't want to clean up, but with pressure from the public through our politicians, we made them clean up. We forced them to clean up. Now, we've gone so far to the left now, we stymie everything economically. If the haves want the have nots to live under their utopian belief of green energy, which doesn't work properly. The fastest way to bring a third world country into the first world status is through coal. Yes, that's true. It's a fact. But regardless, I agree with him. Many of his shows touch on the fact that corporations had a responsibility to society beyond profit making. So his show did acknowledge both the benefits of capitalism while pushing for ethical business practices. So, Mr. Phil Donahue, let's show his picture again. May you rest in peace. Again, born in 1935, December 21st, passed away August 18th, 2024, 88 years old. Rest in peace, old man. You have started your new journey. May God bless you and may God be with you. Godspeed. All right. Now, let's move on to the aforementioned battle between Milton Friedman and Phil Donahue. And again, Phil Donahue brought him out. I have titled this segment Friedman's Free Market Knockout, when Donahue took one for the team in TV's greatest economic bout. Now, I say Donahue took one for the team because he allowed Friedman to come on. He didn't interrupt. He allowed him to speak his piece. That's what made Donahue so great. Whereas Oprah was more about yada, yada, yada. Phil brought some serious issues. Not so did Oprah, but not at the level that Phil did. You know? So, for those of you who do not know who Friedman is, somebody keeps pinging me. This is Milton Friedman. This is a shot of Donahue having Friedman on his show. That was the actual show itself. It's well worth watching. I will put the URL, and I want to thank the Hoover Institute because they're the ones who have provided these clips for the world to see that others have used. But I also did create a cool little image here. Or I think it's pretty cool. Economic showdown of the century. Friedman versus Donahue. That's a great picture of Freeman. That's actually, shows him strong. He's actually a petite little man, but that is Friedman there, and it was. Well, first of all, Friedman was born July 31st, 1912. He passed away in November of 2006, 94 years old. That old man lived a long time. He was a Nobel Prize winner in economics in 1976 for his research on consumption analysis, monetary history and theory, and stabilization policy. He actually was part of Ronald Reagan's advisors. And for those who hate Friedman, you probably hate him for the fact that he gave us our current taxation policy, where they take a little bit out in our taxes every paycheck to where we don't really notice it. That was planned. Because had he, if it was a situation where they want to take out taxes in clumps, we would have noticed. But having it taken out little by little, he was like, "Hey, they won't notice this. They can't complain." Supposedly he regrets that. I've never heard him say that anywhere, but somebody of his stature, I can see that. But he was a leader of the Chicago School of Economics, advocating for free market capitalism. He developed the theory of monetarism, arguing that money supply is the primary determinant of economic activity. And it is. You have the same, money makes the world go round. It's true. Again, he was influential advisor to President Ronald Reagan, as well as British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, the woman of iron. Margaret Thatcher will probably go down as one of the strongest female leaders in world history. He was author of the influential books Capitalism and Freedom and Free to Choose. And his book Free to Choose is why I believe he was on to talk about. Again, a Nobel Prize winning economist, he appeared on Donahue's show to promote his book Free to Choose and discuss economic theories. He was one of the most influential economists of the 20th century. He believed in free markets. He believed in limited government intervention in the economy. He believed what most conservatives and obviously libertarians believe. Now, when he went on Donahue, he went there to discuss topics from his book, The Great Depression, the New Deal, the auto industry, and potential bailouts, which the potential bailouts we know of today happened under Bush. But in his time, it was Chrysler. The auto industry was tanking. They called the Japanese influx, they called them the rice burners, because there were cars built on mileage, not these big steel machines built on looks that were gas guzzlers. So he was there to talk about greed and capitalism as well, government regulation, and obviously free markets versus socialism. His argument was that greed exists in all systems, not just capitalism, stating that free markets harness self-interest for societal benefit. Meaning, so for example, I wanted my fantasy sports company to dominate. That was my self-interest. But it was also the benefit was you would get the best data analysis there. Why? Because my belief was if I was right, if I gave out honest quality information that was more right than wrong, people would subscribe to my services. And that's what happened. We went from like 20 people our first year, like, yeah, we got 20 subscribers, woohoo, to 60,000 when we sold the company. So that was the self-interest part that he's talking about. But the benefit for society was people who subscribed to our services or went to our website looking for information on player news and sports. It's tough to say societal benefit when we're talking sports, but there's a benefit to whether it's being entertained, you escape life for a moment, that's a societal benefit that Hollywood brings. People don't realize movies were created, became big during the Depression era because we wanted to escape the everyday misery of life. He also claimed that centralized political systems are more prone to abuse than free markets. What he means is socialism, communism. Those are more centralized. Those are more corrupt. If you let the free market be a free market, the supply and demand will dictate winners and losers. Now, we live in a cronyistic capitalistic society right now, but there are aspects of free market. That's why I always argue with libertarians. Sure, I love what you say. If I was a perfect human being, because for libertarianism to work, you have to live in a utopian fantasy where we all do and act in the right manner. And that's just not going to happen with human nature because why? Greed exists in all systems. Some of his quotes. Is there some society you don't know that runs on greed? You think Russia doesn't run on greed? Is there some society you know that doesn't run on greed? You think Russia doesn't run on greed? And what he's referring to are people who talk about communism and socialism as being the answer. His point being everything runs on greed. The great achievements of civilization have not come from government bureaus, meaning entrepreneurism, our creativity to make something better, more efficient for the self-interest purpose of us making money and becoming rich. It's sad but true. Why do people act? They love the glory, the grandeur, the fame. Do you think Apple Steve Jobs was so noble that he wasn't going to take that money? No, no. Everybody creates something, they want something out of it as well. And that's what he's referring to there. One of the great mistakes is to judge policies and programs by their intentions rather than their results. And that is the world of Democrats. Feelings, nothing more than feelings. You got to look at the results. And we don't. That's one reason our country is slowly, actually exponentially, on a downward trend. We want to do things that make us feel good. And when you're rich and it doesn't affect you, you will destroy a country. And I bring this example up when they recall the DA in San Francisco because crime was revolving door, and the fact that criminals weren't even being charged or prosecuted. When you look at the districts, all the districts non-affected by all the crime wave, by all the criminals, by all the deaths, murders, robberies, muggings, etc., all those districts not affected, which tended to be wealthy, affluent, or above middle income, they all voted to keep this DA. Every district affected, the working class and the poor districts, all wanted to vote him out because the people who wanted to keep that guy in weren't looking at his results. They're looking at the intentions. So we got to help people. We can't sit there and incarcerate people. Well, if you don't incarcerate a criminal, he's going to go back to being a criminal. You know? Another one of his quotes: a society that puts equality before freedom will get neither. And that's what's happening to us right now. A society that puts freedom before equality will get a high degree of both. In other words, he's saying equity doesn't work, DEI doesn't work, affirmative action doesn't work. None of that works. To be free opens the door to everything that comes with greatness within ourselves, the greatness of a society, the achievements of a society. Freedom brings that about. Equality doesn't, or in our case now, equity. So these are some of the quotes that put him on the map. So some of the broader context, this interview on Donahue took place during a time of economic challenges. Y'all do not know the 70s. The 70s were just as bad and probably worse than what we're experiencing under from Obama with minus the 4 Trump years, and then under Biden with the inflation, etc. And again, this is where's it at? This is a video frame shot of the interview that took place. You know, so the U.S. was experiencing stagflation, which is high inflation with slow growth. The 1979 energy crisis had just begun. Oil prices were spiking, i.e., gas prices here. Keynesian economics was being challenged by monetaristic ideas, meaning supply side economics, meaning real economy was saying make way for how the world really works over your Keynesian theories that sound good but fail to work. Paul Volcker became Fed chairman during this interview session during that time frame, and there was growing public skepticism about government economic interventions. In other words, we don't trust the government. What made Friedman great was he used simple analogies to explain complex concepts. Translation, he put things into layman terms. He maintained composure and clarity even when challenged. See, that's hard for people. Most people blow up and will push back in a mean, vile way. And because everything's on the internet now, we say things we would never say to somebody in front of them, or else we'd risk getting punched out. That's why you're seeing so many fights. You can see more and more fights like at football games. There were 5 fights at the Charger Raiders game in week 1. These are unheard of in years past where you get a skirmish here or there. You know, now, why? Because people are more apt to get violent quicker, because that's what we're so accustomed to being behind a computer. We now inadvertently talk trash in front of somebody, that bam, and they wonder what happens. I just saw a vicious one where this guy was the Raiders guy was fighting this Chargers guy. This big guy came in to break it up. The Raiders guy kept trying to hit the guy breaking it up. The guy's girlfriend tried to hit him too. Well, the big guy got pissed and they beat. I mean, this guy, it was brutal. This guy was beat to a pulp. His eyes were bleeding. I mean, this guy, I'm wondering, he's got a concussion at the very least. He may have brain damage, the beating he took. Why? Because people don't think. Then the woman jumped on the guy trying to break it up and started trying to hit him. He kind of like tried as much as gently as possible to throw her down on the ground away from him. Then people are accusing him, your body slammed the girl. Well, she jumped on him and punching him back in the head. He's lucky. She's lucky he didn't lose it and just literally throw him off her on her head, broken her neck or something. People are stupid, but back to Milton. He used simple analogies to explain complex concepts. Again, layman terms. Maintain his composure. He employed rhetorical questions to engage the audience, meaning he would ask them a question not really expecting an answer because the question he would ask was so self-explanatory. That's what they call a rhetorical question. He balanced academic rigor with accessible language. Again, turn academic talk into layman terms. Thomas Sowell is great for that too. Quick wit, great humor. He also showed respect for Donahue while firmly defending his views. Geraldo never did that. That's why Geraldo's show is already forgotten. That's why Geraldo will never be nothing but a little footnote in history. Where Donahue and Friedman, and this interview will last forever. So let's take a look at this. Let me remove this. So let's take a look here. All righty, let me first, again, thank the Hoover Institute. You can find this full interview there. Let's go.
You see around the globe the maldistribution of wealth, the desperate plight of millions of people in underdeveloped countries. When you see so few haves and so many have-nots, when you see the greed and the concentration of power within, did you ever have a moment of doubt about capitalism?
So Friedman's going to answer, but the reason watching this, I'm thinking, oh my God, where I grew up. And then as an adult, the third world countries I went to, they're the worst with greed. They get a new technology, and I saw this happen in Panama, where I'm Panamanian. They will fish out an area with all their big nets, with other technologies. They don't care, even though they're told. When the Civil Corps of Army Engineers taught where my mother is from, had to manage the river, because we would have extreme floods and droughts, depending on time of season. They taught them how to manage it so the river would flow evenly, so we would have fish, so we would take care of it. When the U.S. left, it all went away. It's as if the Panamanians forgot technology. I went to Indonesia and the Philippines where I'd see areas with all the oil from the gas from the motors. They didn't care. It was all about got to get all the fish, got to do all this for me. The greed. So Phil here is talking from a noble perspective of where he's at, where his home, he had maids, butlers, etc., etc. It's like Eddie Murphy coming to America, had somebody to wipe his tush. He didn't realize it. And you get in the working world, man, you get a little advantage, boy. The greed comes in. So here's how Friedman responded to him.
And whether greed's a good idea to run on?
Well, first of all, tell me, is there some society you know that doesn't run on greed? You think Russia doesn't run on greed? You think China doesn't run on greed? What is greed? Of course, none of us are greedy. It's only the other fellow who's greedy.
Bam! It's only the other fellow who's greedy. That's how the average person looks at life. Well, it's not me. It's the other person. It's never me. Really? Really? Because as a kid, I know, as I said earlier, you were downloading music videos illegally. You were downloading, or you were hacking it, watching pirated movies. You were playing crack video games where you had the code. You could get in there and play it. These are all extension. Greed is an extension of human nature. And it is we, men and women, who run governments, who run corporations. Thus, our greed is seen through them. And yet we have the audacity to view them as separate entities, as if they are living beings unto themselves. No, it is you, and me who run and live those corporations. Why? Because we all have human nature, and greed is part of that human nature.
The world runs on individuals pursuing their separate interests. The great achievements of civilization have not come from government bureaus. Einstein didn't construct his theory under order from a bureaucrat. Henry Ford didn't revolutionize the automobile industry that way. In the only cases in which the masses have escaped from the kind of grinding poverty you're talking about, the only cases in recorded history are where they have had capitalism and largely free trade. If you
Capitalism, there's nothing better. He's absolutely right. Call it an evil, but what out there is proven to be better. Those who haven't had, or those who say we haven't had the right people in charge to implement Marxism, socialism, and communism are wrong, because we never will. Again, human nature will always dictate, and greed and corruption and savagery, i.e. war, is part of our DNA. Power corrupts, and it corrupts absolutely. There's no human immune from that. So you can blame capitalism all you want, but there is no better system in place to move us from extreme poverty into middle class into riches. Capitalism is the only economic form of marketplace ideas that does that. Those who say otherwise, they tend to be professors who don't want the debate and would rather cancel others out. Look at college today. It's not a place of free speech, of expression. It's a place, if you disagree, we want to cancel you. Why? They've been corrupt. These are academics who've been there forever. They believe they know better than anybody. It's a great example of human nature and how we are corrupt within ourselves, how power corrupts, absolutely.
You want to know where the masses are worse off, it's exactly in the kinds of societies that depart from that. So that the record of history is absolutely crystal clear, that there is no alternative way so far discovered of improving the lot of the ordinary people that can hold a candle to the productive activities that are unleashed by a free enterprise system.
But it seems to reward not virtue as much as ability to manipulate the system.
And what does reward virtue? You think a communist commissar rewards virtue? You think a Hitler rewards virtue? You think, excuse me, if you'll pardon me, do you think American presidents reward virtue?
When you see so few haves and so many have-nots.
Virtue? You think, excuse me, if you'll pardon me, do you think American presidents reward virtue?
My apologies, I hit the wrong button there. Exactly. So let's talk about Obama, because the media made him out to be so virtuous. Did he select Joe Biden as his vice president because of virtue? No, because he was told to. You want to get elected? You want this? Well, no, I'm virtuous. I'm a virtuous person. I'm going to select who I want, and that's best for the country. No, you're going to select Joe Biden because we're telling you to. Okay, I'm going to sell out and I'll take Biden. Did he make Eric Holder as his AG because he was virtuous? No. Eric Holder understood racism and had to play it to his and Obama's advantage. Did Hilda Solis, as labor secretary, who was aligned with the labor unions and not for Americans, did he select her because she was virtuous and he was? No, because he was aligned with the labor unions, not Americans. Hillary Clinton as the Secretary of State, virtuous? Don't kill me, Hillary. I'm just using you as an example here. Obviously, that's a running joke with the Clintons. They are one of the most corrupt, if not the most corrupt politicians of our lifetime. Ann Duncan, Secretary of Education, who was owned by the teachers' unions, did nothing to help kids. Did he select any of these people because he was virtuous? And the worst of them all, Timothy Geithner, who cheated on his own taxes. And Obama knew this. Obama pushed Solyndra, who he knew was corrupt, and they went bankrupt after being given billions by our own country. Did he do any of this because he was virtuous? No, he was never virtuous. In the end, the data proved his policies didn't help anyone, and he made empty promise after empty promise after empty promise. But people thought he was virtuous. He gave people false hope, knowing he would never deliver that. Those who believed he was virtuous believed a lie. He was not an angel. The greatest travesty or example of his lies working their magic was when a woman, after he won the nomination or election in Detroit, broke down, believing he would now take care of her by paying her rent, gas, etc. And he did nothing to dissuade that type of talk, that type of belief. So no, there is no American president. I'm using Obama. But conservatives who thought either George I or George II, the Bushes were virtuous, were idiots. Clinton, that he was virtuous, please. Biden, obviously not. So there is no virtuosity or no virtueness in any leader of any government or corporate entity.
Do they choose their appointees on the
No.
basis of the virtue of the people appointed or on the basis
No.
of their political clout? Is it really true that political self-interest is nobler somehow than economic self-interest? You know, I think you're taking a lot of things for granted. And just tell me where in the world you find these angels who are going to organize society for us. Well, I don't even trust you to do that.
Arguably the greatest 2 minutes of economic talk in the history of television. You can go to the Hoover Institute to see that whole interview. It's brilliant. It's brilliant. Milton Friedman is brilliant. He smacked down communism, socialism, and even our own presidents of those who believe they're virtuous. Those political appointments, none of them that Obama made, that Bush made, were virtuous. None of them are angels. And there is no political figure that does something in the greater interest of humanity than a corporate entity. In fact, the corporate entity, I would argue, does more because they're bringing a benefit to society. Politicians don't. The 40% of money they take in from us, 30% is wasted. And 10% you can question the results of. I want you to think about that. There you have it, my friends. That is the show. A look at capitalism from the wastelands of Fallout to the TV stage of talk television. To Phil Donahue, an icon in the industry, rest in peace, old man. God bless and Godspeed on your new journey. And to the rest of you, thank you for tuning in. Hit share, hit like, subscribe. And remember, you can find this show and others like it, political and sports, at grumblingsmedia.com, as well as YouTube, Rumble, Apple, Spotify, y Pandora, under the profile moniker Grumblings Media. So until next time, my friends, I am William Del Pilar. This is the Red, White, and Rude, and I bid you adieu.
Hey everybody, this is Big John from Grumblings Media, and I just want to say thank you for watching our content. If you want to support our efforts here at Grumblings Media, just smash the subscribe button right here, totally free, or just go ahead and consume more of our great content. Click either one of these two boxes.